The roommates of a refugee bludgeoned to death in an Australian-run detention centre on Manus Island 9 years ago will not stop fighting for justice. The Australian government has finally recognised the suffering and misery inflicted on Reza Barati's family by reaching a confidential settlement. But Reza's friend Behnam Sattar, who witnessed Mr. Barati's murder, told Lydia Lewis it doesn't go far enough.
Actually, I am very sad that this is confidential. They are not publishing it to people know what happened. We need to know what settlement they reached on. Because it wasn't just Reza. We had more than 200 other people who were injured at that night, which 77 of them just were admitted to the hospital. It wasn't just Reza. One guy was shot. One guy lost his eyes. His eye that is still in Australia suffering. Other people, I am very aware of Australian brutality about trying to wash their hands off the crimes they do in other places. But it is, Reza's case is not something that can be, wiped out of the history. I will follow it up. As a person who testified in court and risked his life and got many threats to be killed, not to go to court, I will say not for Reza, for other people I will follow up.
What happened to Reza?
Actually, he was murdered by expatriate and locals at our doorway in MA6 room number was 12, and he was escaping from telephone room because when they attacked us and started shooting, Reza was in the telephone room. He went there to call for help, but unfortunately they got him on the stairs and. First Joshua, who is on the run at the moment, he was, just in jail like for 3 years, and after he escaped. But, Louis, he did his time. So Joshua beat him in the head, and when he fell down, Australian expatriates, started, kicking him in the head with their boots, and not the one, kicking him in the body. Everyone was aiming for his head. And after, 15, I gave all their names and I details because I was interpreting in the months before for all this security. I would know all of them. I have been dealing with securities for many months before that. And because there was not much people who spoke English, it had to be me, and I knew all of them. But 15 people attacked Reza and beat him in the head, but it was just only two locals who were charged for it. And the Australian officers, two of them that I identified in camp after, when Wilson took over from G4S, they came back and working actually in the camp.
Now, I just want to talk a little bit about Reza. I want to know who he was to you, what kind of person he was, and how you remember him.
Actually, Reza was my best friend, my roommate, and a person that we get to know each other in Indonesia, and we were like about 2 weeks or more than 3 weeks in the same hiding place in Indonesia, and we were from the same language back. We were both Iranian and both Kurdish Iranian. And during the time in Indonesia, I got to know him, and he was such a nice guy. He was very like a giant person in body, but with a very beautiful heart. That always during the time in camp, he was doing his best to motivate others to take people to gym, and he was a bodybuilder, and he was teaching others. But for me, he was like my best friend and a brother to me. We were so close. I was teaching him English. I had English classes. I was running English classes in camp. But for Reza, I was, teaching him in our room every day, 1 to 2 hours, and, practicing with him English. And it was very unfortunate that, he was murdered in that, February attack.
You say you knew the guards, you knew their faces, and you even identified New Zealand expatriates that you say were involved, but only 2 people not New Zealanders, not Australians, were prosecuted. What's your message to the New Zealand government?
Actually, for the New Zealand government, I personally don't have any problem with the government, but these people who New Zealand, sent to Australia, and Australia want them to beat up and murder my roommate. I would like the New Zealand government to bring these people to the court and ask them, if you're a New Zealander, how did you contribute in a murder that Australia wanted you to do? How could you beat a refugee that is on the ground in the head with your boots, and you see that blood is coming out of his head, blood is like showering from his face. I don't know who broke his nose, that he did all his anger on Reza's, and he was beating him, with his boots on his head. I would love that New Zealand government could bring at least justice, at least a couple questions from this guy. Why did you murder a person? Murdering that person, the Reza is gone since 2014, He was 23 years old. He had lots of, hopes and wishes to achieve, but he was deprived of it because an Australian and New Zealand expatriates, and that's a very big shame.
After everything that you've been through and still are, what would bring you peace, if anything?
Actually, the real peace, nothing, because I have already lost 7 years of being in detention and 3 or more years, which I could, in this time, I shouldn't have been dealing with, PTSD in France. I should have been able to, get on with my life. It's 10 years that I lost with nothing can bring it back. But what that can, ideally makes me a little happy is the life of these people who were tortured by Australian government, these around 3,000 people who were sent to offshores in Manus and Nauru. If I see they are happy in their life, I will be happy. But unfortunately, majority of them are suffering, no matter in US, in Australia, or New Zealand, or Canada, or in Europe. I'm in contact with majority of them. They are suffering mentally. Many are suffering physically as well, but there is no exception in the mental problems that everyone is facing now. There are people in US that from us that are sleeping in the streets. In Papua New Guinea, there is still 70 people left there that every day, life for them is a torture. They are just, trying to get to another day. A day that I see all these people can, get on their life, that will bring me peace.
RNZ Pacific has contacted both the New Zealand and Australian governments for comment. New Zealand's Foreign Affairs Ministry is yet to respond. A spokesperson for Australia's Home Affairs Department says the department does not comment on the details of confidential legal settlements.